everyone, welcome back. We're completing our discussion on the planning artifacts and the project architecture by discussing actually creating a release plan and getting our product together to start development and moving forward with it. So let's just jump right in here. So why do we do a release plan? Basically, this is going to be our idea of a roadmap for our team. Now, this release plan does not mean that we are committing to following it 100%. When we do an initial release plan, it really is just sort of to give us a general idea of the expectations, how far we expect to get, where we think things should land. Things happen, ideas change, right? So this isn't about making something and sticking to it. It's more just about giving us a solid foundation of a starting place and making sure that we all know the general direction that the project's going in. So we're going to break down a really big vision into these like small sprints, and for us that's going to be sort of 3 working code sprints and then our initial setup sprint that includes this release plan, right? And this will allow us to adjust scope if things sort of come up while still staying focused. It ensures that even if things come up along the way, we know what was the furthest out and what might get pushed out and not used in the end, or what we can bring in if we end up having more time than we thought. So planning all of that out ahead of time really gives us that flexibility while we're going through it to make smart, educated decisions about where we're going next. So the roadmap for our team really does talk about when we will do what, right? Does our vision for our project actually fit into the time frame that we're talking about? It also allows us to sort of decide what should be shuffled to deliver a working project within each deployment. So that idea of breaking that vision down into smaller sprints, it does mean that we can sort of look at it and say, at the end of this space, how much can we deliver, and does this constitute a working project at each step along the way? And like I said, right, we're adjusting scope. If we have too much, what can be removed? What was that stuff that was all the way down the line that maybe doesn't matter as much? Or what maybe needs to be reframed and shrunk down into a smaller scope sort of story? Having this release plan really gives us that power. So within our course, like we said, we're going to have 3 sort of real coding iterations, 3 sprints. Our iteration 1 so iteration 0, right? Iteration 0 is when you make your GitLab project sort of set up correctly. You put your features in, you put your user stories in, you put your milestones in to tell me like your roadmap, when you plan to complete which stories. In your stuff that you intend to finish in iteration 1, you put your developer tasks. You're sort of just getting everything set up and a chance for your whole group to be on the same page and sort of ramp up. Then we start with iteration 1, and this is going to be sort of the skeleton code and minimum a core feature. So we're going to have a minimum viable product. So at the end of this, we should have something that you could demo and say is working. Whatever you decide to get done is going to have unit tests associated with it. Unit tests, I know I skipped database, but and then what we're going to also have is this idea of a fakie or a stub database. So let's say your initial project idea, your core feature is login, right? Being able to log in and entering the welcome screen, right? People love doing that for their first feature. I don't recommend it, but people love it. So let's just rock it for a second. In order to get the login screen working, you have to be able to successfully log in. In order to successfully log in, you need to be able to create a user. And now all of a sudden, login is contingent on create, but we can't test create without login. And we end up like in a cycle that is crazy and makes no sense to our brains. So this idea of a fakie or a stub database is going to help us with this. We're basically going to assume that a user exists in the database already. We are going to, in our database code, put in fake, like an array list of users that we hard code in. And I'll show you this if you choose to watch the project code walkthrough in the next video, but it's an optional bonus video. So you sort of just fake it. And then you can code up your login screen using data you know exists because you hard coded it in, push login, and as long as it successfully logs in, you can say, well, I have the feature login now. You can't create new users, you can't do anything with it, but if the person already exists, we know it logs them in, and you could also do, if the person doesn't exist, we know it doesn't log them in, right? So not just testing all the positives, but the negatives and the exceptions as well. So that's iteration 1. Typically when we say core feature, that should probably have like a S on it, like plural. We want like 3 features, right? You want to try and get 3 features in there. Iteration 2 is going to be the expansion iteration as well as polishing. So all the features that you implement in round 2 in iteration 2 need unit tests. You're going to have a bunch of technical debt to pay back from iteration 1. So when your instructor goes through your code and tells you all the things that need to be cleaned up or tidied or have sort of refactored, you're going to have to fix that stuff up. You're also going to need to implement a real database. It'll be an in-memory database. Again, it's not on a cloud or anything like that. It's on the device itself, in the code, in the application itself. And then you'll also be adding in integration tests for your existing code. And then your iteration 3 is going to be your stretch goals, your stretch features, and cleanup. Now, minimum possible new features here is important because originally you're probably going to plan to put 2 or 3 features in there, as you should, but in reality, you're probably not going to get 2 or 3 new features in there. You can't have 0 new functionality, but don't put anything really big at the end, okay? From experience, don't put anything really big at the end because it probably won't get done. Most likely you'll have lots of tech debt to clean up, and then you'll have some system tests and some end-to-end tests that you're going to write as well. Now, if any of these words are unfamiliar to you, like tech debt or integration tests or acceptance tests, that's okay. We're going to talk about them throughout the videos, and they sort of line up really nicely with when these things are expected to be done by. At this point in time, you should feel comfortable enough with sort of getting your iteration 1 started. We're going to talk about unit tests in a video. I'll go through the JUnit test. We're going to talk about again, in my next video, you'll be able to see the stub database and sort of understand maybe a bit better how these pieces connect. I'm going to use an old groups project to do this. So you should be able to start to fit those pieces together for iteration 1 over the next week. And then as time goes on, you will get the rest of the information in there. Don't take this lightly. I'll tell you right now, iteration 1 feels light, but it isn't. Iteration 2 feels the heaviest. And iteration 3 is somewhere in between, but you are a better team by iteration 3, and so it ends up being okay. Not very much here, though. So when it comes to actually estimating our story size, we did talk about this a little bit, but I just want to sort of bring up one more thing here. We have this idea of how do we estimate our stories, what does make sense to do, and there are a few different mediums that people use. Some places like to use like t-shirt sizes, small quick tasks, medium-sized tasks, and large tasks that maybe need to be broken down. So really you only are focusing on small and medium tasks, with large being more discussion needed. Some places use story points. Story points aren't technically associated with days or hours, but sometimes they end up feeling mapped to days and hours. This is like a really neat sort of deck of cards. I actually have some somewhere in my office. But the idea being that, if you gave something a 1 story point, it means low-hanging fruit. A 2 story point means a piece of cake. A 3 story point means it's not rocket science, and so on and so forth. If you look up story point cards, you can sort of learn more about what all these different analogies mean, and you could use them. Now, the one that we unfortunately use in this class, maybe fortunately, it's certainly the simplest for us to wrap our brains around, is this idea of hours. So we write things in hours, but some really important things that we don't want to forget are truly asking what are the working hours for us, right? Like what's a reasonable amount of working hours for each person? Some of you are in 3 courses, some of you are in 5 courses, some of you have a full-time job outside of school, some of you don't, right? So we really have to discuss with our teammates what we feel is fair and what working hours means. We also want to make sure that we're considering things like, does having meetings about stories count? Do we count those as story hours? Are we only counting hand to keyboard time? What about like researching or debugging, right? So when we're doing our hour estimates, especially in the beginning, you should do your best to encompass all of these things. If you've never done the kind of development we're doing in this class before, you're gonna have research time. There's gonna be debugging time. It's important that you overestimate and come in under the gun, while still, of course, maintaining the fact that you have to get a certain amount of work done according to the project scope. So lots of different sort of metrics and criteria that you have to sort of manage. But these are all really important discussions to be having with your team before you go in and say, oh, this will only take me 2 hours. But you were thinking 2 hours of just like coding. You didn't think about all the time it would take to figure out how to use Git for the first time, right? So just having those discussions with your team. All right, what kind of features make the most sense for each of our iterations? You can do whatever you want, right? I am not gonna stop you from doing whatever you want, but this is a really good idea for that general flow. So what we can see here under iteration 1 does include login. It includes viewing of existing data, setting certain data up, but you'll notice it doesn't include like the CRUD stuff, right? Like create, read, update, delete. It's much more heavily focused on just pulling stuff that is pre-existing and sort of showing that on the screen in a nice way. Iteration 2 involves the more core workflows. So you can't have like no interaction with the screen for iteration 1. It can't just be viewing data. But if you have a login and viewing data, the login will have some validation, right? You'll have some kind of functionality and behavior. It's not just viewing. Iteration 2 is that core workflow where you can sign up with something new, where you can add new items, or you can delete items, or you can edit items. Since we're getting our database together for iteration 2, it's a good place to start pulling in all of those different database functionalities and behaviors. Once we hit iteration 3, this is the place where it makes the most sense for us to do our error handling and our exception handling. It doesn't mean you ignored errors and exceptions in iteration 1 and 2, but here's where we're really going to start to polish it. We're going to create like custom exceptions and build out like a logging system and just something that makes more sense for our project. We're polishing things up, and then any of the extra sort of fun features we were hoping to get in, this is the place where we'll work on them if we have that, that time in our scope. Now, the reality with Agile, and this is like the most important part here, is you will be wrong. You are going to set everything up. You are going to be like, this doesn't feel like very much, or this feels exactly right, and all of those are going to be wrong. It's going to be too much. And that's okay. The goal isn't to make it perfect. It's to plan for change, right? We're not predicting with perfect fortune teller, view of what we should be able to do in this time. We are making a plan, a long-term plan, so that when things change, we know what should come next or what needs to be removed. And keeping in mind that there will be time for debugging, for reworking, for refactoring. We have to take that time and set it aside so that we know we're not going to run out of time to do it. Because the reality is, especially in this course, that is going to be a key component of what you find yourself working on. So at this point, I want us to just take a pause and reflect, right? We have all of the pieces we need sort of at this point to decide on our projects, plan out our features and our user stories, get a release plan going, get our architecture diagram, and sort of understand how the components should talk to each other. Like, we're ready to start coding. So let's just take a moment and consider, what do we think done would mean for our project? Does done mean finishing all of the features that we originally set out to do? Does done mean the minimum viable product at each iteration end, right? What is done actually going to mean for us? Is it just the end of the term? It'll just come and it'll be what it'll be, right? So take a moment to think about it and think about what that done actually means and how you're going to map out your project according to what your expectation of done is. And at that point, you'll be able to draft a release plan, assign 3 or 4 features to each of your iterations. Like I said, you want to aim for like 3-ish. It's okay if they don't all make, like, if some of them are a little crazy, especially toward iteration 3, because the reality is we won't get all the way there. We're mocking up a full release plan, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're committing to that release plan, right? So just keep that in mind. You're going to need this release plan when you go and move everything into GitLab anyway, so this is a really good pause and reflect to sort of just take a beat and actually try it out before you end up talking about it in class. Yeah, so with that, the second week of material is all done. I do have a bonus video where we're going to do a sort of sample project walkthrough. I will be pulling code from a previous terms group, like a group that did a good job. It may not be the same technology that you're using, it may not be the same database, it may not even be the same platform. But what we're looking at is the architecture, the setup of their GitLab, we're not actually looking at the code itself and the implementation itself at this point. At this point, we're just going to be looking at that sort of overarching view and how things map together. So that's just something to keep in mind when we're going through it. I'll say it again at the start of the bonus video, but if you do choose to sort of tune in over there, just keep that in mind that you shouldn't be copy pasting the code that they wrote, because that's not the focus, and I probably wouldn't have used this project if that was going to be the focus. So really just make sure you're sort of tuning into what the objectives are from that video, from that walkthrough, should you choose to join me in it. Cool. All right, with that, I will say thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you either in the bonus video or in the week 3 videos. Bye.